Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of the In the Same Boat podcast, Building a More Sustainable World. For those of you who don't know, this podcast is connected to In the Same Boat, which is an environmental NGO based in Norway that specializes in cleaning the Arctic and Northern Europe of marine litter. Through professional beach cleaning, education, and community engagement, our mission is to create a plastic pollution-free world and protect our oceans. My name is Zamira. I am a former volunteer and now I'm a full-time member of In the Same Boat. I am the sustainability ambassador and volunteer coordinator, and now I'm a podcast host. So I'm very excited to start this new project, and I hope that you find these episodes inspirational and that you can learn and you can be motivated from this. So enjoy the episode. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm sitting down with Wietse Van Der Werf. He is the founder and CEO of the Sea Ranger Service, which is a social company whose mission is to restore 1 million hectares of ocean biodiversity by 2040, while training 20,000 young people towards maritime career. Welcome, Wietse.
Thank you.
Thank you for
me.
taking the time. Yeah, thank you for being here. I just want to jump right in, and I want to ask you, what inspired and what were the events that led to you to found the Sea Ranger Service?
Yeah, so when I was young, and with young I mean 9 years old, I became a youth ranger back in the Netherlands. So this was a program where every weekend you'd go out with the park rangers and you do forestry work and bird counts. And it's just really, I just loved the work. It gave me a sense of purpose, making a difference for the environment. So from a very young age, it was very much instilled in me that sort of went into service for nature. And then sort of fast forward, by the time I'm 19 and I'm working on a research ship in Antarctica, the years after did a lot of research on illegal fisheries. So really got to grips with both how there is a need to protect nature, how the life at sea working on the ship changed me, and particularly in the case of oceans, how we just need more capacity. We need more people out there to properly monitor and manage the ocean.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. And then I saw on the website that the Sea Ranger model was inspired by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the United States.
Yeah. So then I'm doing this work on fisheries, and I'm focused, and this is around 2010, 2015. I'm focused on how do we strengthen enforcement of fisheries law. And all of these coastal communities I'm in, actually, I'm learning that there's all this deprivation and poverty and very few opportunities for young people. So while I'm actually trying to tackle some of the symptoms, of course, the root cause of problems like illegal fishing is also that there's just these areas are in such social economic decline, the areas around the coast, and at the same time, we need capacity. We need people to be trained and employed to actively manage the ocean. So it was very strange. So I kind of thought, how can I be in these areas where there is high unemployment, but at the same time such a high need for work to better manage the marine environment? So how could these two problems act as each other's solution? And then I learned about the Civilian Conservation Corps, which during the 1930s in the United States, during what was known as the Great Depression, essentially mobilized over a time span of 9 years, 3 million unemployed young men from the inner cities. And under the guidance of the army, they actually constructed 800 of the national parks that are in the US today, planted over 3 billion trees. It left a huge legacy of a young kind of urban, young male kind of generation that got that appreciation of nature, but also were paid, did evening classes, learned lots of skills. And subsequently, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the US was brought into the Second World War. But right up to the moment, for 9 years, it essentially affected the largest nature restoration in human history, while at the same time being a huge kind of social impact program. So the thinking was, how can we translate this into a modern day maritime setting? And that became the Sea Ranger Service.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And what I think is really interesting about the Sea Ranger Service is that it combines this nature restoration with employment. So there's an environmental impact and a social impact. That combination, what does that look like in practicality? What is the model of what the Sea Ranger Service is doing?
It essentially means we are focused on the people before the nature. And as a nature conservation organization, that is a bit different from how other organizations work. So that means from the get-go, we look at the development potential of young people. We work in very deprived communities along the coast where we recruit people. We have veterans from the Navy in the Netherlands and also in the UK, but also former Marines that then run special boot camps to train the young people to make selection. And subsequently, we connect them with professional seafarers to then essentially spend 8 months to a year doing a lot of different assignments. So sea rangers do different types of surveying, different types of monitoring, research at sea. And what makes us relatively unique is that we do that as a social enterprise. So we are directly contracted by governments and government agencies to do this work. And after that year, we connect young people with the different maritime employers to give them long-term employment in the maritime sector. So you could say that we've done something that's, I think, a little bit contrary to what maybe marine conservation people do, which is that typically, I guess, you collect like-minded people around you. But what it has looked like for us to focus on that social mission is that we want to make sure we can pay people a living wage straight away. It's not about volunteering, which I think, well, for many of these communities, that would be, it just wouldn't be possible for young people, but we provide jobs. So it means we work directly with government, with maritime industry, with the Navy in a way that really makes that social impact count, whilst sea rangers then are deployed to do lots of nature management and restoration work.
Yeah, because I mean, there are so many social issues going on in the world, and I think sustainability can often be quite a privileged issue to care about the environment, to care about plastic pollution. There are people that maybe are not able to put food on the table, or they're in like war zones or in just situations where the caring about the environment is not really a priority, which is completely fair. So bringing in a different perspective where we can give you a job and you can sustain yourself, but in a sustainable way, in where we put the people there, but it's also environmentally friendly, is, I think, the way to go for the future, because if not, you're alienating a lot of people.
Absolutely. So there's a question around social inclusion. Why should I care about the end of the world if I have to worry about the end of the month? That's a very valid notion of, again, the social economic situation people find themselves in. So when we work in South Wales, for example, this is a former mining community where a steel factory was closed down last year. 3,000-4,000 jobs suddenly gone from a already community where there aren't a lot of opportunities. You're even there in a situation where, mom and dad don't have even a few £100 to pay for a deposit on a room so you can study in a big city, even if it's only an hour away. So you have young people that are very capable that simply just don't get an opportunity, don't get a chance. So how can you turn that enthusiasm and drive that young people then have into kind of the workforce that is going to actively help to manage and restore oceans in a big way? And of course, if you then do that in a way that also helps to recruit people for the maritime sector or even for the Navy, and we as an organization have a very strong alignment with the Navy, that's a decision we've made, well, then, of course, you suddenly have very strong allies that can really help you bring in the training capacity, can bring in all types of work where you can do that at a much bigger scale. So over the last 5 years, we've been sort of starting really slowly. We've had like over 200 youth in the program. But the expectation is that over the next 2-3 years, already that's going to go past 500-600, and we're going to kind of scale from there. So it's really also about how do you design a program in the way, what partners are involved, how is it financed, to make it truly financially viable and scalable. I think we need to be way more serious about the impact we're making on a much larger scale than simply just doing good things. Like, we really need to be serious about kind of the systems change that's needed for oceans and coastal areas.
Yeah, absolutely. In your work, and you mentioned also at the beginning kind of doing research on the illegal fishing and things, what have you seen the biggest threats for the ocean, and what kind of worries you with the state of our oceans?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because some things actually are going well. We see certain types of legislation, fisheries restrictions, kind of different anti-pollution measures. We see actually that the maritime industry I don't think it's changing fast enough, but there's definitely changes. We see things moving to hydrogen-powered vessels. We see the use of diesel electric engines. Like, things are changing. There is a transition. I think we need to really push that transition forward. And still, where we also see that there's those positive changes are happening, there's often just a lack of capacity. So even when things can be financed, so just finding the young talent, the young people to go into those sectors to do the work. I mean, at the moment, there's huge shortages of people to work on ships, to be underwater welders, to have special technical skills to work in offshore wind farms. And so, I mean, I, of course, I talk less now about the problems and more about the opportunities that are out there. But it's even for those opportunities, yeah, there's just such huge opportunities for young people. If you want to work in the maritime industry today, you can have a job guarantee for life and earn really good money. And actually, what I think most young people don't realize is actually a lot of the climate solutions that are really scaled where they can make a global impact. Yes, the maritime industry can be a very polluting industry, but equally it's where these solutions are going to be implemented to great effect. So isn't that exactly the place where you would want to be part of that change?
So it doesn't have to be a fight against the maritime industry. It can be a dialogue to then change maybe our behavior or our mentality within the system.
Yeah, and it's and I recognize that there's other organizations or groups that look at this very differently. So they may have more of a campaigning or activist perspective, and that's of course equally needed. As in, we are affecting a broader societal change for oceans. But I guess what I saw over time is there's a lot of scientists doing incredible work and people working on policy changes, and then campaigners help to kind of affect those changes, where finally politicians say, okay, we're going to act, we're going to make changes. But then that last puzzle piece on implementation, how do you implement that well? And that's where then the real impact is made. And there's almost no one that supports government on implementing well. So we just saw a huge opportunity there. And that's what the Sea Ranger Service really focuses on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, what you said, I think there is the need for the really loud voices and to kind of hold people responsible, really call them out. I think we do need that to kind of start getting a bit more active as a society. But I think also it's equally as important to then go back and be like, okay, but how can we actually work together? Not just like insult or attack, but how can we make the change? Because at the end of the day, it is, I mean, the governments and companies hold a lot of power still, which is where the change is going to come from.
Absolutely. But I think what I found in the last years is that the things that maybe 5 or 10 years ago would be seen as kind of quite out there, things that people were still campaigning on in the boardrooms, it's now considered inevitable that those are the changes that's happening. So then it's also a question like, if you continue following the same kind of NGO campaigning model of the last 30, 40 years, you start to reach a point where there's so much awareness and you've affected actually bigger changes, where then the question is, how do you, and not in a greenwashing way to emphasize, but in a tangible way, how do you then potentially support? So, we work with port authorities, we work with different kind of marine operators, we operate ships, we do a lot of work in the sector where we can really make big impact. Yeah, it's just amazing to be able to work right where the action's happening.
I wanted to ask you, because working for an environmental NGO, one of the challenges, like a lot of discussions that we've had internally, is how to express or how to communicate our story in a way that's engaging to make people care. Because in a world where there are a lot of issues going on, hearing all the time about how plastic is killing us and the world is on fire and we may not have a future can make people want to just disconnect, which is completely fair. So how, I think already based on your perspective, what you said, you don't focus so much on the problems but the opportunities, but in your experience, what has been the way for you to communicate the story of, okay, there is a danger, we do have to change, but how do you inspire people and get them engaged instead of just maybe the fear or, yeah.
Yeah, of course, the climate anxiety, for like for a better phrase, is real and very understandable. I guess what we offer is saying to people, okay, you're seeing what's needed, then let's make it into a job. So then we're going to point you to what you can do. And in a way, it's also, I think there can be a danger in over intellectualizing the problems. So yes, the problems are big. It's, I think, very important not to feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders as an individual, especially as a young person. Like that is a dreadful way to be. Like that's never going to happen. And, I'm very sorry to say, but you are not going to save the world. It is not going to happen. Like, you need to sort of find your niche, find people that you work with well, and find your role in affecting the changes that are needed. So in a way, we have created a role and said, actually, we can train you, we can employ you, we can pay you, we can give you career perspective. And it's that perspective. In Dutch, in the Dutch language, we have a word. It's called handelingsperspectief. And it literally means the perspective on how you can act. So I think once you give people that perspective of exactly what they can do to make that impact, then I also think it's a more genuine way to engage people, because I don't ask them to donate money. I don't say to them, like our social media post and we'll save the world that way. I think the integrity is also about being very honest with people and saying, look, this is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. We had a government minister a few years ago when there was a big climate march in the Netherlands, and he was interviewed by the national media on the same day. And there was a big school strike. A lot of young people had left school that day to strike. And he said, actually, for the transition, we need people with specialist skills. So actually, if you want to work on the climate, and make a difference, you need to make sure you especially stay in school. And I heard it. I kind of thought, well, what kind of a remark is that? That's not a very sympathetic. But he does have a point. One of the best things you can do if you do want to make an impact is specialize, is do specific training, learn about the kind of jobs for the future that are out there, learn about those sectors where they're really scaling solutions in a big way. And they have huge shortages. So that's where you as an individual can make an enormous difference. And I think you'll find that once that is a way in which you approach your change making, you'll also find that that's like very sustainable, because it will end up meaning a job. It means a career. And it means that, again, you as an individual suddenly really has influence to make that necessary difference.
Yeah, that's true. Once we can accept that it's not up to us individually to solve all these things, then maybe we can get out of the paralysis that sometimes like eco-anxiety can cause, and be like, okay, where in my little grain of sand, where can I put it? Which then turns into like much bigger impact.
Yeah, and it's also when you mentioned grain of sand, so we do large-scale seagrass restoration at the Sea Ranger Service.
Yeah.
So last year, we had sea rangers actively working in 6 countries around Europe on actively restoring seagrass, literally bringing nature back to life on the water. It's been really interesting. We have a very large group of sea rangers who are young people that have studied at university. They maybe finished their degree, or they're in a master's, or they're in a gap year. And they literally come to us and they say, I'm motivated because I want to get out of my head. Like I want to stop all the kind of thinking and the theory. I want to do something. And then suddenly they're with their hands in the mud, they're actively planting seagrass. Like it doesn't get more concrete than that. So if you care about nature or the planet and you want to restore it, well, let's then do that, But that also means you then have to work, which means the Sea Ranger job is a job. It means every morning you have to get up on time. You're part of a team, You have to be, sort of disciplined about the work. And that we find that it totally changes people as individuals as well. They go through huge kind of leaps of personal development in that period, but it is also a reality. So in a way, I would say that we also challenge people by saying, okay, well, if you're serious about making the difference, let's do it then. But let's stop shouting from the sidelines. Let's really get in there and do the work that's necessary. While at the same time, again, all the change making that's happening around the world is really vital. We would never criticize that, but we just do it in this way.
Yeah, we can in the same boat relate to that a lot, because we do have a lot of young volunteers. Some are 18, 19, like what you mentioned, the gap year, and it's putting them to work. It's like, I remember when I applied for In the Same Boat, I felt like I wanted to be something bigger than myself, and not just start talking about wanting to change, but actually do it. And I mean, the trash that we're picking, like, it is really hard work. We're in very remote areas. It's not beaches. It's like coastlines. Sometimes you have to like walk for so long. It's heavy. At the end of the day, sometimes you want to cry, but it does give you that discipline. You're part of a team and you feel like, okay, I can see the change that I'm making. And it's so much more inspiring to then keep going and get the momentum, which is great. But I wanted to go back to the seagrass. and dive a little bit into that. Why seagrass? I don't think a lot, because since I've been working for this NGO, I've been doing more research on biodiversity in the ocean, and learning about seaweed and seagrass has been just mind-blowing, because I just don't think enough people know like the amazing properties of those small plants.
Yeah, amazing. What huge difference such a small plant can make.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a flowering plant. It grows near the coast. It can both be fully submerged, but also grow in intertidal areas where it's fully exposed once the tide is low. And essentially, it has, well, first of all, seagrass meadows are essentially the nurseries of sea life. So a lot of other different fish and other species like spawn in these areas, reproduce. So they're kind of like little areas that provide cover and nurture for a lot of different sea species. But the real sort of power comes into how seagrass essentially absorbs carbon. It's a natural carbon sink, and it stores carbon in the sediment. So, and then subsequently can emit CO2. So it essentially captures CO2 in a way that allows those coastal areas to really be a carbon sink. Over the last decades, we've seen a huge, very sharp decline in seagrass around the world. This is mostly due to kind of human activities, destructive fisheries, anchoring at different sites. And yeah, essentially, there are now techniques to actively restore seagrass. So in areas where there are conservation measures, where once you plant it, it won't be directly destroyed, there's now real scope to plant it back. So you're actively supporting biodiversity while essentially, scaling a climate solution. So a few years ago, some scientists who have done this work contacted us and said, we do this work now, we do it at scale, but the much bigger scale would come if we're not fully reliant on either volunteers or students. So if we could if we have a permanent workforce, ideally, that could do this work. And that's when we started training and employing sea rangers full-time for this restoration work.
That's great. So then you said, where are you planting currently all this seagrass?
Yeah, so the process, as a little bit of background, the process of seagrass restoration includes in big healthy seagrass meadows collecting seeds of the plants that you then plant in other areas. So we actively collect seeds in Denmark, Germany, and northern Spain. And we actively plant them in different areas in France, the Netherlands, and the UK. So in a way, we are redistributing a lot of seagrass material, you could say, throughout Europe to make sure we kind of get that balance back, that some of these very degraded marine habitats get restored thanks to the kind of abundance that we see in some other areas.
It's incredible because a lot of the human activity has caused this, I guess, maybe for our oceans or the biodiversity to be quite sick and degrading, but also they are the solution to the problem we have caused in a way, what you were just saying, the carbon sink. And that if given the chance, the ocean, the plants, they're very smart. They can regenerate very quickly. We just need to give them that chance and that push.
Absolutely. So the one of the most inspiring people I've been lucky enough to meet over the last few years, who we also now work with very closely, her name is Laura Govers. She's a associate professor at the University of Groningen in the north of the Netherlands. And she's one of the people who've really led the seagrass restoration work in the Waddenzee, which is a big intertidal area in the north of the Netherlands, one of the largest intertidal areas in the world. And I think it took about 8-9 years for them to actively restore what ultimately was around 300 hectares of seagrass. And that was already very large scale. And then over the last 3-4 years, every year, essentially the seagrass then dies out over winter and it grows back in spring. And then the next year it suddenly doubled to 600 hectares and then it doubled again. Yeah. So currently in the last count, this area of where the seagrass is now distributed, where it has essentially replenished, is across an area of 1,600 hectares, making it officially the largest successful intertidal seagrass restoration in the world. So when you start thinking of that kind of scale, to be able to work with her, to replicate her kind of restoration techniques, to also, and I should add very importantly, to have an opportunity where young people don't just have to be trained academically, but instead they can be trained and employed to work vocationally, just with basic technical skills to do this restoration work, suddenly also means that the social inclusion piece means that young people that are never engaged in this sort of work come in. And suddenly in seagrass restoration, it means we're changing our use of language. We're changing the way we communicate about this type of work. So it's been really powerful to affect this. Plus, once you restore nature in a way that simply creates jobs, that also means that local and regional authorities and governments are really, really keen to give you all the permits you need when you bring employment and rights. Suddenly, it's not just about nature, it becomes about people.
Yeah, it's like you've almost found the loophole in the environmental activism world where you've like created something very valuable. So companies or governments that may not even have the same mentality as you can't really say no.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I think what I learned over the years, it's like there is a big difference in you trying to convince people about your viewpoint. So I think a campaigning group, I guess, would work very hard to raise the awareness, to get people on board with the need to protect nature. Now, that's very important. But there is huge limitation to that, because it means you're only collecting around you like-minded people that are motivated to protect nature. Now, that sounds strange when I say it that way, but when you have to restore seagrass, suddenly I need civil servants, I need people at port authorities, I need a government minister, I need investors, I need all these other people to come on board. So if instead there is a way to appeal to their intrinsic motivation, which may be slightly different to our own, then suddenly, like if you're asking people to contribute to something that they're already intrinsically motivated to do, it's very different. So that means for the veterans that come from the Navy and train our young people, they just want to make a difference to support young people that may be struggling a little bit, that help them in their personal development. So that means we make the program. Yes, it's about nature. And the veterans also think that the seagrass restoration is important. But primarily, it's a program for them to actively make a difference to the lives of young people. But then someone else who's involved, who then works with those people to restore seagrass, may look at it very differently. And that's okay. So I would almost say we've thought of the end goal, like what is it we want to achieve? And again, instead of finding like-minded people, we instead almost made an ingredient list and kind of thought, well, what are the exact people with the right expertise that we need to get this done in an ideal world? And suddenly we found that some of the largest maritime and government type partners come on board to make that vision a reality.
Yeah, wow. And I can imagine that has allowed you to be able to scale the Sea Ranger service quite quickly and to expand outside of the Netherlands into other countries. And looking towards the future, are there in what ways do you want to keep scaling? I know in the website it says that by 2040, yeah, you would want to like restore like 1 million hectares and train over 20,000 young people. But what are some other projects that you have in mind that you'd like to accomplish?
Yeah, so we're essentially scaling in three different ways. We're scaling geographically. We launched recently a social franchising program. And that means that entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs or other entrepreneurs in other countries can apply to essentially set up a Sea Ranger service themselves, where we bring in the kind of support and the guidance and the training on how to do this, where they in their own country work with their government and their Navy to really establish a Sea Ranger service. So that's the first kind of scaling step. The second is that we are expanding in the types of activities that Sea Rangers are involved in. So this year we do our first work in oyster restoration. We last year worked for the first electricity company. This year we expect to do first work for water companies, where suddenly the capacity of Sea Rangers for different types of work becomes relevant to them. Similarly, in the offshore wind industry, we're starting to do some work there, where around these offshore wind farms, we can actually restore nature at kind of some of the foundations of where these wind turbines are built. Because we operate ships, we have the capacity to do this kind of work, which typically for environmental organizations is very difficult to have even access to the sea to do that. And then the third way is that we see that traditionally, when we initially set up the Sea Ranger service, traditionally we've really just focused on training young people as seafarers. So we train them so they can work on ships. With the work on seagrass restoration, that's a different profile. So essentially it's a new profile of Sea Ranger that really is instead trained in kind of landscape management, ecological research and nature restoration. And that also then transitions into other jobs with other types of employers that do this sort of work. So suddenly for different regional authorities, for different government landscape managing type agencies, these young people become very, very useful. And then the third sort of profile that we're seeing is also working more with data. So sea rangers that can collect, process, analyze different data that's collected out in the field. There's a real need for that. Now, it may even in future mean, and we're looking into this currently, could in future someone who isn't physically capable to do field work or to work on a ship, could we actually train someone as a sea ranger just focused on data work, that they can be employed from where they live if they have limited mobility? Is this a way to even increase the inclusivity in that way? I mean, that'd be very powerful if you can have purposeful work to young people that may have that have just that limitation. Really, scaling in these kind of three areas, we just see huge potential. And it's a very exciting time.
Wow. Well, you'll be quite busy.
Yeah, indeed. Lots of work.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh my God. Well, I just have a couple more questions for you. One of the things is a bit more getting away, I guess, from what we were talking about, but from your time at sea, working in the sailboats and the ocean, what are some things that the ocean has taught you?
I think it's been a very humbling experience to be at sea, especially when you're out in Antarctica, when Mother Nature throws everything it can at you and you feel very small. So I think that sort of power, the might that nature has, it's just been a very humbling experience. And I think it's sort of taught me to see really things in perspective. Like things, also change making, it takes time. You know, if you're listening to this and you are, really want to break into kind of doing work around oceans or nature, or like, yes, things are urgent, but also like take your time. What I do now, it's from 1992 when I first became a youth ranger. I've never looked back in terms of working for nature. But it also means it's now taken me 33 years to ultimately get where I am today, where I can really make much bigger impact. So that's not to kind of discourage anyone, because actually if you train as a sea ranger, within a number of weeks, you could be employed and do the work. But so I just think, the ocean, it really has allowed me to see things in perspective. And that also allows me to sustain this work for decades, literally, because I'm not sort of burned out quickly. I can really see the long-term perspective.
Yeah, I can see that like you're quite hopeful with it. And I was going to ask, like, what is your hope for the future of ocean conservation? You were talking about like the way that you want to scale Sea Ranger service, but just like in a global way, what is your hope for that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. When we work with, of course, young sea rangers, every year we have an influx of young people that, of course, are becoming colleagues. They work with us for 8 months or to a year. So we get to know everyone really well. It's a huge privilege to be able to have an organization where that happens every year. And also our alumni sea rangers, sort of former sea rangers, are becoming even a whole force in themselves. Like they're becoming increasingly active, recently involved in beach cleanups, like doing all sorts of work. So I think seeing young people in that role and seeing the sense of pride and identity they take from being that sea ranger and doing that work, it's just, I think the younger generation, I think, really gives me hope for the future. And also seeing I would almost say their pragmatism as well. I notice I meet a lot of people, maybe it's also the kind of people we attract for the sea ranger role, that literally say sustainable use of oceans. Yeah, duh, of course, that's logical. So it's also, then very pragmatically saying, look, we know what the problems are. Like, we know all that. There's no point in watching another documentary about how at the state of the ocean. The question straight away becomes, well, what are we going to do about it? And then you're in the realm of solutions in terms of scaling, implementing, and that's, I think, that's really giving me so much encouragement to see a growing movement of young people that kind of take that on. And there's lots of really climate solutions being scaled, different startups starting, and it's really encouraging to see that creativity tackling this huge kind of climate and biodiversity crisis.
Yeah, that is true. There is a lot of focus on the news about the negative things and all the things that are going wrong, but there are so many incredible people that are out there really making an impact. And this is also one of the reasons why we want to start this podcast, to highlight those stories, such as the Sea Ranger service and so many other entrepreneurs or activists who are really dedicating their life to make a change. And that is just as equally important to remember that And like you said, I do think that it's such a good sign that the idea of taking care of our oceans among a lot of the young people, or at least also the people that I'm around, is just like a no-brainer. It's just like, yeah, well, we don't even have to discuss that. Of course, now what do we do? Which I think also in the days where eco-anxiety kind of threatens to overwhelm me, I have to hold on to that and be like, no, but there are people and there is hope and we can make a difference.
Absolutely. And it's also, it sometimes feels that there is an inevitability in all of these problems in the world, but actually what's really inevitable is the change that we're all affecting, because things are going to change. So it's just a question of how do you drive that change and what's your role in it? And I would almost say that anything you're interested in, whatever your passion is or your kind of genius or, you know, what you're good at, that is something you can apply to nature restoration or ocean conservation. Whether you are a designer or work in marketing or you're a musician or you, whatever it is, there's a role for you there, because almost every organization that works in this field needs kind of all the different aspects of operating. So I think, yeah, I remember a few years ago, I met with a dentist and I was at a TV studio and I did an interview, it was for TV. And then this person who was in the audience came up to me later and she said, oh, like, love your work. I mean, I'm not sure what I can do. You know, I'm only a dentist. And then, and I've now stayed in touch with her and we're discussing that for some of the sea rangers coming from the more socially deprived areas, that her dentist clinic may provide free dental care to some of those sea rangers. Now, you can think that's somehow a little silly or it's like, why does that matter? But this is, again, this is finding the intrinsic motivation of people and linking that into your work. And it's incredibly powerful. If this is a way you can build momentum and build kind of a movement, it's really powerful stuff.
Yeah. Nature and taking care of nature, it's not incompatible with our life. And we just have to kind of turn it around and realize that what you just said, that no matter where you are, what talent you have, it can have a connection. I mean, that dentist taking care of somebody who's then going to take care of the earth, like, it all indirectly connects. So
yeah, and then beautiful. How do you make it also tangible?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's often also sometimes when you really want to press the issue of how urgent things are, that can also switch people off. When you go really deep into the problems, it just, people disconnect. It kind of goes over their head. But the moment you make it very tangible, actually that nuance can be really much more powerful way to collaborate. And sometimes I think that's a little lost, where there is kind of the notion that if you want to really make people listen, you know, you have to sort of be stronger in how you communicate. But sometimes the subtleness can actually be the real.
Yeah, that is true. Also, like, to reach a wider audience, I think, because you can isolate or alienate people a lot by being maybe sometimes a bit too aggressive and using the guilt and things like that.
Yeah, and I've also learned not to make any assumptions.
Yeah.
Like when I now stand in front of an audience of officers from the Navy and I explain about our work, there is huge support also for ocean conservation. But it's all in how you then show that and the kind of way you sort of design that and formulate it. Now, that's typically an audience where you may not think that this sort of support is there, but it definitely is. These are also people experiencing the ocean, of course, in a different way. But it's just been really interesting to, in a way, find the most unlikely partners that are now making us possible to scale this. And it gets even, in a way, crazier because at the end of the day, we are a social enterprise. And that means over the last few years with all the support, we have done contracted work. So these are projects and assignments, meaning that is revenue. So we also have the ability to attract investment to even scale that further. So the sort of potential for us to scale this across, well, really across the world, really standardizing how these sea rangers are trained, how they're operating these ships, how we're really professionalizing ocean conservation in this way. It's just really, really, really exciting.
Yeah, I really like that about not making the assumptions. I think within the same boat, we've had a lot of meetings also with different people within the fishing industry, the maritime industry, just all of these sectors that sometimes can be really easy to judge and to just be like, we're on team nature and you're not. When that's not the case, a lot of people that we talk to end up being like, yeah, no, of course we do care about the environment and ocean, but then it's just finding another perspective and be like, okay, well then how can we change the work so we're not exploiting nature? It's not against it. How can we be like, we need jobs, we need to have an economy. How can we do that in a sustainable way? Create a circular economy type of situation. So yeah, I really like that.
Yeah. We need everyone at the end of the day.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I was gonna make very cheesy pun and say we're all in the same boat, but we are.
It's cheesy, but it's true. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It works. It works with the NGO. But well, thank you so much, Wietse, for your time and for this conversation. I really think it's wonderful. If people want to support a Sea Ranger service or want to learn more, where can they go?
Yeah, so they can go to searangers.org. And we run different boot camps, of course, for the training of Sea Rangers. And there's actually a lot of vacancies opening up over the coming months as well. We're really growing a lot. So yeah, please get in touch and engage with our work. And I just want to thank you again for inviting me today to share our story.
Of course. Thank you so much.